So with that, I'm incredibly excited to kick off one today, but two this conversation. Fewer people have, and this is obviously connected to my deep discussion with Lee yesterday evening, have a clearer view on how trust is being shaped in the digital age than Lee Fulmer. His career is wild and wonderful, and I hope you do get to have a conversation with him at some point today. But just a few lines that I sort of selected here. But creator of BBC Online, um, advisory board chair at Open UK, former chief data officer at UBS, currently senior advisor globally at McKinsey. Lee, come and join me on stage. Let's kick this off. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Good morning, everyone.
So for a long time, institutions like the BBC have earned trust through their reputation and authority. Today, trust is earned much more through experience. And for nonprofits, that's a fundamental shift. And donor experience can't just sit in marketing, and I'm wearing my marketing hat right now, but it should be an organizational strategy. With that framing, you have worked at institutions across media, across finance, across government. Two questions, and hopefully they sort of link. One, will you just frame your experience, sort of a elevator pitch of Lee Fulmer, and then just lean a little bit into your sense around how trust has changed over the past couple of years when it comes to institutions?
Easy questions to start with. So I guess the first thing is the elevator pitch for me is always a tough one. People often ask what I do, and it's easier to say what I don't do. I guess I classify myself as a chaotic creative. I've always had one foot in the art world and one foot in the business world. I sold my first photograph when I was 12.
What was the photograph of? Do you remember?
It was a picture of Mount McKinley, actually, that I took on a little 110 Instamatic camera, but I had rotated the camera 45 degrees because I couldn't get the width of the photo in the frame, and everybody thought that was amazing at the time. It was just a 12-year-old trying to get a shot of something he liked. I guess I was a published poet by the time I was 18, and I wound up in tech, of all things. And so I guess for me, it was always about how do I use this as a tool, the same way I use my camera or a paintbrush or a pencil, to affect change. And that's what it's always been. My entire journey has been about how to drive and transform things. If I use that then to kind of talk about trust, right? I think for those of us who were born in the last millennium, which I know sounds really depressing, but if you think about it, we came from a time when our parents would have grown into an industry where the company was very paternalistic, right? The big corporates looked after people. You had pensions you could actually retire on. I think there was a lot of social care. And as a consequence, there was an innate trust in some of these big companies. Some of that came from their social remit, like the BBC. Some of it came from the way they took care of things for their employees or their communities. But I think over time, that changed. And I think fundamentally the shift became, sadly, due to capitalism, right? We wound up increasingly in a situation where the brand was thought of in the 90s and the noughties as a commodity, as a value, as an asset on the P&L, right? There was an infamous study years ago where Coca-Cola was valued as a brand at X, right? Whatever X was totally irrelevant, because if you destroyed the reputation of the company, you destroyed the value of the brand. And it's not like somebody else would just pick it up and be able to use it to make cars. So I think that we moved away from that transition of the identity of the organization into how we sell the organization. And then honestly, that transition, I think, broke a lot of people's sense of ethics, right? Because people started to think, well, I have to take care of myself. In the 90s, when final salary pensions all kind of disappeared, people thought, I have to think about myself. And so as that evolution happened, people became the weak point. And again, there isn't a big global institution that hasn't had a people related scandal. And all of those scandals are what has then eroded the trust in the corporations. And we look at the people now who make up those institutions, and they're the ones that we're looking at in terms of, do I trust you with my money? Do I trust you with the safety of my children? Do I trust you not to cut the wrong limb off when you amputated a leg? And it's become that shift that I think creates a level of distrust.
How much of this shift, though, has come about because of technology versus managing people's expectations?
Well, it's an interesting one because a number of years ago, I was asked by the Financial Times to speak at a dinner for a ton of bankers at a big conference, right? So there's 500 bankers in the room. It's about a decade ago, so everybody's worried about quantum and how it's going to break security, and worried about blockchain and was it going to do away with payments. And it was supposed to be a talk on disruptive technology. So Martin Wolf asked me to get up on stage and do my pitch. And I got up on stage and I said, I'm here to talk about disruptive technology. And I'm here to tell you, I am the most disruptive technology in banking. And then I got off the stage and sat down. And the audience was like quiet and then got very vocal. And then Martin Wolf was, you are going to get back up on stage, aren't you? Please get back up on stage. And I gave it a couple of minutes and then I got up and I said, does anybody understand what I'm trying to make the point of? And of course, a bunch of bankers raised their hand, but they didn't. And the fundamental point was that technology is not disruptive. The way people use technology is disruptive. So when you ask the question, like, what's pushing the change? Is it the tech or is it expectations? It's a combination of the two. You can't really separate it, right? Again, when I started in technology, most people didn't have a computer, right? We had dial-up modems to connect computers to other things. So it was a very, very different world to where literally everybody in their pocket, actually mine's over there, everybody in their pocket effectively has what would have been a supercomputer 20, 30 years ago. And so that shift has changed their expectations of their engagement and what they can do with the technology.
Talking about shifting expectations, and you mentioned the banking world. We don't have Monzo in the United States, but I've got plenty of friends here who now use it every day. Monzo is a great example of a organization that has set the bar for digital experience. To what degree do you think that when people are interacting with organizations, for example, in the room here, that actually that experience online is directly being compared to their experience with Monzo versus HSBC, for example?
So I think the reality is that everybody has their own lived experience. And I'm not trying to be philosophical here, but in terms of where you do things and the interactions you have and the amount of friction that that creates, right? So as an ex-banker, I don't bank with one bank for a number of reasons, but predominantly because the whole thing they try to sell you around, we will take care of your life, is just not true. Right? Fundamentally, they want your money for deposit capital to loan out. They want to loan you something because they want the interest payment back. So I have different banks for my mortgage because I went to the people who gave me the best deal, versus my current account, or a checking account as they call it in America, versus my investment, versus my pension. So I literally have 4 different banks, which for me is a pain in the backside, but I've picked the banks that give me the best product and that I have the best experience with. So without naming banks, right, the bank that provides my mortgage provides a terrible current account, right? The app I use to manage my investment is actually better than the one I use to manage my current account and my mortgage. So it's for me, it's about, what am I trying to do and how do I get it? And honestly, when I talk to people, even the CEOs of very big companies, they will say things to me like, why is it that I can go onto Netflix and I can watch The Transporter, and before I know it, it's showing me similar movies by Jason Statham I want to watch? And I was like, okay, first, good choice. I love The Transporter. Secondly, because of the data and because of the algorithms, right? So you're giving your information over for them to profile, and they can make that experience smoother.
So where do you see trust being built or lost in digital experiences?
Um, so the first thing I would have to say is I hate chatbots. I absolutely abhor them. If I go onto somebody's website and there's a little stupid pop-up thing in the bottom left trying to say, hi, my name is Annie AI, can I help you? I often will close the website. I just think, nope, sorry, I'm going to launch Tor, which is a privacy browser, and block all that crap because I just can't tolerate it. And again, I think if you look at your own experience, like how many people here like it when they ring any company for anything and get stuck in an interactive voice recognition unit where you're trying to say what you want and it doesn't understand your accent or it just doesn't compute. So I think that whole thing creates a sense of distrust. It really does, because you think, I wouldn't be calling you if I didn't have a problem. Or I wouldn't be going on the website if I didn't want to buy a product or a service or look for something. When you stick the friction in there, it naturally makes people pull back and go somewhere else. And again, I think the problem is as well, so I'm going to go out on a limb, say none of you are technology companies, right? Which means you probably don't know how to manage your tech yourselves, which means you're depending upon other people to do it for you. Simple things like security certificates for websites, the little HTTPS, the padlocks. I cannot tell you how many times, it's probably at least once or twice a month, where I go to even big companies and the security certificate has expired. And Safari pops a little message up to say, ooh, this might not be a private connection. Are you sure you want to do it? We recommend you don't. Those sorts of things erode trust. And it's simple. It's like £100 a year to buy the security certificate, but you have to be thinking about it. So as you push into the digital realm, it's important that you either within your teams or with your partner understand these little teeny things that can create that friction and erode that trust, and that you're on top of them. Because if you make the mistake, it's really hard to capture me back after I've gotten annoyed.
Which suggests that one, you're tracking, secondly, you're measuring, and thirdly, you have access to data, which is clean. That you can. Clean data is not a.
Clean is a very subjective term, right? Just to be clear.
Very good. But it assumes you've got data and you can read it and you can interpret it. It's an organizational asset.
So I feel it is. I will tell you, I spent most of my career trying to convince business people that it is. I try not to use technical words, right? So in my experience, when I talk to a lot of people, as soon as you mention the word data, their eyes glaze over, right? People start thinking Microsoft or Oracle or databases or nerds in a dark room writing code. And if you talk about it in terms of information, what's the information you need to make a business decision? What's the information you need to try to figure out how to appeal to me, to get me to donate something, right? That's a very different conversation. And again, anybody who's born in the last millennia, you probably remember filing cabinets. Like, I remember when we had to curate the information we kept on people because you just didn't have enough space to store all the paper. I mean, these days you can pop down the street and pick up a gigabyte USB stick for a tenner. So people keep everything now. And that's why I say clean is very subjective as a term, because a lot of the data you might not need, but if you can identify what you do and you can codify it and know that you have it, just even knowing you have it can be a huge boon. It does become an organizational asset because it can help you with your decision making. It can help you with your outreach. It can help you with the trust.
Where do you think organizations are struggling to use data effectively, assuming the data exists?
So I'm not a charity and I've never worked for a charity. So please, if you think I'm wrong, feel free to tell me over coffee, not on stage. I think that the biggest challenge for most companies I've worked with, so since I started this advisory work with McKinsey, I've worked with pharma, I've worked with government, I've worked with technology companies, and banks, although ironically not very many. And the same thing I find over and over again, it doesn't matter how big the company is or how small it is, they universally have different data information in different IT systems for different purposes, right? The finance people have their general ledger, the HR people have their HR system. A lot of small companies obviously use software as a service. So you're using SAP for your accounts, you're using Workaday for your HR and recruiting stuff. And the problem with all of that is that those systems don't connect, right? They're never designed to. They don't want you to connect because they want to hold you as a customer and make it hard for you to leave. It's like an addiction. So I think in that sense, the biggest problem is usually knowing what data you have and knowing what you can use it for is the second thing.
But how do you then move into making better decisions with it?
So I think the first thing you have to do, and I say this to everybody, is you have to understand what you have, right? So again, you would not, as a charity, buy physical assets and not know where they are, right? You wouldn't buy a bunch of mobile phones for your people out in the field. You wouldn't buy laptops. You wouldn't buy a desk or a photocopy or anything like that and lose it, would you? But actually, that is what you do with your data. You get an application, even if it's Excel, right? Let's just devil's advocate. You're all using Office 365 because you're getting it cheap and you're storing all yourself in OneDrive. The problem is you're probably not all storing it in a common OneDrive. So you're each storing it in your own little setup. And when somebody leaves to go to a different company, then you lose access to that. So again, understanding where stuff is hugely important. You do not need to hire a massive team of data governance people. I would encourage you not to, because when you get a bunch of people whose sole job it is to govern your data, they get a little bit too ivory tower-ish with what they do and how they do it and what they prescribe. But understanding what you have, what you've collected, where it sits, and then sitting down as a team and saying, what's valuable? Like, what is actually valuable here? Is it repeat donor lists? Is it actually what's happening in the market? Maybe you operate in one country, but there's a global issue that you're a part of. What's happening in other markets? And are you collecting that information, even from conferences like this, where maybe you've got access to the recordings or the transcripts or presentations afterwards? Is it stored somewhere where everybody back in your offices can see it and leverage it? It's so important to just understand what you have and what the value is for that.
My mind immediately says, surely there's a tool for that from an AI perspective. And I suspect most people have just thought that. But how should leaders be thinking about AI just thematically today? There's a lot of noise, and I suspect people are a little anxious about it and excited about it. But give us your take.
So I'll go back to yesterday. So I was speaking yesterday at a AI for CFO summit organized by The Economist, literally just down the road. And it was fascinating the number of CFOs who have FOMO, right? Just like my teenager does, fear of missing out, because they think if they're not jumping on the AI bandwagon, that they're going to be done out of a job. And it's fascinating because, again, I see it anybody I talk to in my various roles. There's this constant worry. And what I always try to start by saying is, look, AI is not new. Everybody's acting like this is just something that's happened since ChatGPT came out like 3.5 years ago. It's not. By the way, the sort of stuff you can do with ChatGPT, I was doing 20 years ago, 20 plus now, at the BBC with natural language generation and natural language processing. The big difference back then was the amount of data that we had access to. So it's like logarithmically more now, and the compute power is a hell of a lot cheaper. But again, I would argue we were better at it 20, 25 years ago because we curated the data that went into the algorithm, right? Whereas today, when you look at something like ChatGPT, if I'm allowed to say this on stage, it's shite. I mean, literally, raise your hand if you've ever read anything on the internet that was rubbish. I'm serious. Raise your hand, right? Like, if you don't put your hand up, I think there's something wrong with you. So if you run an AI company where you build your language model by scarfing up the internet, like by definition, 80% of what's in that LLM is junk, right? So should you be afraid of it? No. Should you know what it is and how to use it? Yes, right? AI is a discipline that encompasses a lot of different things. You know, we've been talking generative AI for the last few years, which again is made universally accessible to the public in a way previous things were not. So I think that's been the big shift. Everybody thinks they're an AI expert now. But people at the cutting edge have stopped talking about generative AI and now they're talking about agentic AI. And again, in 2 years' time, I guarantee you that will have fallen to one side, moved ahead. So my biggest feedback to people yesterday was anything you do with AI today has the potential to be your legacy application of tomorrow.
So, what do you think people are not taking seriously enough about either the opportunity or the genuine threat of AI?
So I don't want to sound like a negative person, right? Because I think AI as a discipline has a lot of benefits. So let's start with something positive. Um, I think that there are a lot of tools that are out there. You all have it in your phone because every one of your phones in this room, unless you're using an old Nokia brick, has some sort of AI system in it, right? That is helping raise emails to your attention, identify VIP contact messages, even just the notifications that pop up on your phone, right? Siri, if you've used Siri or Alexa or any of these things, you're interacting with it. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And I think that when you look at people like my kids, they are very comfortable interacting with those things. So if you can think of a way, devil's advocate, to offer something up through Alexa so that somebody can ask, what is MSF doing today? Right? You create a new way to connect via a new channel with a new generation who might want to actually contribute, volunteer, or donate. But I think on the flip side, you also have to be incredibly cognizant of the fact that anything that you put out there, you immediately lose control over. So you have to weigh up the downside risk. What happens when the AI makes a mistake? Well, when I make a mistake with your data, it's one mistake. When an algorithm makes a mistake with your data, it's potentially millions of mistakes. So again, extrapolate that to your organizations, right? You have to think about how you curate the information that you do put out publicly and that you make available to these engines that are searching it and indexing it and using it. And also maybe think about, should you be putting in right of forget with some of these people like Gemini or with ChatGPT so that they aren't actually putting your intellectual property out there in a misuse way.
Can you help people understand right to forget?
So it varies by country and legislation, but effectively, everything, generally speaking, is deemed to be public information if it's accessible on the internet, right? There have been lots of copyright lawsuits over this for literally decades. But by and large, unless the material is copyrighted, these companies can use it, right? So like if your posts are public on LinkedIn, Microsoft can ingest them and use it to train their algorithms. You can, in the European Union, in the UK, and in the US, make a request, and they all have mechanisms for you to do it, to have your data removed from the LLMs, from the algorithms, from the training mechanisms. They have to comply with it. They bury it. So they make it very, very hard for you to find. I remember when LinkedIn started saying, we're going to train our LLM on all your posts, I actually put up a post explaining to people in my network how to opt out if they wanted to. But it is a legal right, and it applies to legal entities in a lot of jurisdictions as well as individuals.
You mentioned Alexa. Admittedly, beyond turning my lights on and off, Alexa doesn't get used. At UNICEF, we tinkered with an opportunity to say, if you're watching something on the TV and you see something terrible, and you can say, Alexa, donate to UNICEF. The challenge sounds great, but the challenge is behavior and teaching people that you can do that, and then encouraging people to do that. So there's a behavior shift. Do you think there's an opportunity in voice in general for raising funds at various different points? Emergency fundraising clearly comes to mind.
It's a tough one.
Hmm.
So I am the sort of person who tends to lock everything down,
Hmm.
right? I have a separate identity I use for any interaction with Google because I don't want them profiling the rest of my life. So not a lot of people do those kinds of things. I don't use Alexa for the simple fact that all the Amazon equipment is constantly listening to everything that is happening because it doesn't do any what we call onboard processing. So there is nothing in the Echo Dot that actually is doing any sort of natural language processing. It's taking your entire stream and sending it back to the data center, listening to the trigger word, and then sending it back. That I don't like. So I have HomePods instead because Apple puts the NLP stuff into the HomePod and it only establishes the connection when you make that trigger. I would argue that most people under 30 have already given up their right of privacy, so they probably don't have the same concerns, right? If they did, they wouldn't be posting some of the shocking stuff they put online, right? And again, I think people like the convenience. I very rarely use Google Maps, and when I do, I use that segregated ID and I run it in a container on my phone so it can't access anything other than the GPS, right? Because I don't want them building a profile. Most people don't know how to do that. So again, I think that if you asked me, would my son, for argument's sake, who's 24, computer engineer, be willing to interact like that? I can tell you categorically no, because he knows what can be done. If you ask my 16-year-old, he would just think it's cool. So again, it comes back to trust. It comes back to the partner you work with. I think that has to be key. I will give you a good example where that sort of donation thing in Ireland, we do it slightly differently. So most of the mobile phone companies are partnered in this thing where they allow people to text a number and the money can come straight off your phone bill. And so when we do appeals for, disasters, because the Irish have a huge reputation for trying to be supportive of other countries that are going through problems, because Ireland's just had a load of problems for a very long time, largely due to you British, but we'll gloss over that for a bit. So I think we have that mechanism. And it's interesting because every year we have this thing called the Late Late Show. Well, actually, it's every week, sorry. Every year at Christmas, they do the Late Late Toy Show. Right? So you get dozens of kids on TV. They're reviewing toys for Christmas and stuff. Every kid in the country wants to get on the show and they all want to step and watch it. But they raise money for charity to buy toys and dinner for people who are homeless or low income or disadvantaged. And this year they partnered with Revolut. So it was fascinating because literally you could just pull up your Revolut thing. There was a little tag for it and you could spontaneously donate. And my older two kids, who have Revolut accounts, I didn't prompt them. They just did it because they know they're fortunate. So I think there are definitely frictionless ways that you can engage with those sorts of audiences, right? And I know Revolut doesn't operate, I don't think, in the US in the same way, but there are other things that do, right? And there's more of these things popping up all the time.
Talking frictionless, it sort of also prompted me to think about creators and how today people engage, different ages, whatever it might be, different demographics. What do you think one or two key differentiators can be for organizations building brand, trying to be relevant? Maybe thinking outside of the box of traditional direct mail or combining direct mail with digital, which I've seen work fantastically, or looking in completely different channels. The question is just around differentiation. And, you and I were talking about nonprofits in many, many ways are very, very similar to, just service organizations.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? Just differentiation.
So in a capitalist, consumerist world, there are really only two types of companies. You can forget about your purpose for a second. There are companies that produce goods and there are companies that produce services, right? So we come back to the conversation of trust. If you produce goods, you inevitably have some sort of loyalty with your customers. Somebody who's a fan of Nike is not going to abandon them because they do something stupid and damage their reputation and switch to Adidas. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, Apple's done some really dumb stuff over the years sometimes, and it's made me angry with them, but I'm still not packing an Android phone, right? So I think that in your case, you are all services companies, right? You are not selling me a good. What you are doing is actually providing a service to somebody else, and you're looking for me to help you do that. So the ability to damage your reputation is much, much higher, right? Again, let's go back to the point about my banking. I'm quite happy to shift my mortgage to whoever's going to give me the best rate. They're not really selling me a good, they're providing me a service. But again, I'm not necessarily going to junk my brand of car because it's had a recall, because I've always bought the same brand of car for like the last 15 years because I've never had many problems with them, which I can't say the same about some of the other cars I had when I was younger. So again, I think when you try to look at the differentiation, you have to think about your audience. So I hate all the direct mail stuff. It just inevitably winds up in the recycling bin.
But I love it. I'll tell you why, because I never receive it. So when I do get something, I stick it on the fridge. I'm like, wow.
I'll send you a postcard, okay?
So that's not really keep in touch. I like that.
So on that, let's go back to when I was younger in the 80s. I remember donating money to the WWF. I was telling you about this, right? And they sent me a picture of the panda that my money was going to help. And my initial reaction was it's just a random panda. But ironically, I knew somebody else who donated to the WWF, and actually they got a different photo, and it was clearly a different animal, right? So to me, that made an impact, right? I felt a connection. I actually thought my money was doing something useful. My grandmother was very, very ill towards the end of her life. She couldn't leave the house. There was a Meals on Wheels program that brought her food. And so when she passed away, I actually responded to that when they were doing a call out for fundraising, and I did a massive cycle thing and raised money for Meals on Wheels. I actually worked at the Seattle Aquarium for a while, which again is a charity because it's all public funded, public as in us, not government, right? And I used to run things where, I would get money and I would upgrade the Pacific Reef tank, and I would show how much money was in the donation and how much we spent on the tank and what we were doing with the protected species, right? And we would organize cleanups of the beach. So there were real tangible things that people could see their money being spent on. So maybe you like direct mail. There are probably quite a lot of people who still do. I guess what I would say is that regardless of whether it's direct mail, whether it's an SMS, whether it's a web interface or a push email, whatever it is, I think the differentiation has to come from clearly demonstrating that you're doing something, right? So we were chatting earlier about how a lot of children's charities, there's always a picture of a smiling child. Like, who the hell wants to donate money to a smiling child, right? You're thinking the child doesn't need anything from me. And no offense, but UNICEF was notorious for that, right? So I think I don't necessarily want to see a miserable child. And again, there's the ethics around using children like that as well. But I think you need to make sure that people feel a connection and that they are actually seeing what it is that they are donating to. And again, I'm not saying it's easy. And as a photographer, I know it's not easy because I deal with the ethics of photography a lot. But there has to be, the differentiator has to be establishing the connection with the donor, whether it is Bill Gates, who's just giving you $100, sorry, banking term, 100 million, or it's me giving you a tenner. It doesn't matter. There has to be that connection back to what my money is doing.
So 2 notes, more for us all here. One, we have a conversion rate optimization, behavioral science conversation just after lunch. So we will touch on creative and smiling children or otherwise.
Probably tell me I'm wrong.
I think it's audience specific to your point. And then we'll be followed by a CFO panel. So I think that connects really, really well. But at this point, we've covered trust, experience, AI. Can I just throw it out to 20 questions? If anybody has any questions for Lee.
I have no filter, so don't feel shy. There we go. See, that worked.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
When I was a much younger man, I read Bill Gates' one is about books, and it was really like a homage to this world we were going to live in, where like your marketing would know everything about me, because you wouldn't have to follow a chain of ads or go onto supermarket websites there, because we know everything about and only give you the stuff that you want to. And that was trumpeted certainly by him as something amazing, something that like
would be the future, an amazing future. I feel like I'm going to sing now, but I'll spare us all that.
That's for the boundary later. So you had a few drinks.
I guess my question is like, how did we get from that, which I think most marketers thought, wow, that's going to be great, to a situation where you're like going to extreme lengths to make sure that these things know nothing about you. And I'm sure a lot of people do. And I suppose, is that generational? So will we end up in this place that Gates envisaged all that time ago? Or is human nature such that we'll always be against sharing our information in that kind of way, even though it helps us?
So I'll repeat just a synopsis because I know it's being recorded as well. So one assumes your colleagues will be able to watch this afterwards. So the question was broadly around Bill Gates' vision years ago that, computers would know so much about you. They could profile you and show you what it is you would want or need, so you won't have to look at a bunch of random ads effectively. I would say, firstly, that the tech bros are always pitching a vision that nobody really feels they need or want. And so a lot of this stuff is hype, and it doesn't always materialize. The flip side to that is if you look at what Google does and what Meta does, they have the art of profiling you down to a T. So they are showing you ads that are very much tailored to your profile. They're just not necessarily what you need or what you want. I think people have not realized, by and large, that they're not buying products anymore. They are the product, right? To Meta, we are all a product, and we are a product that it is selling to big corporates to try to push things at us that we probably don't want or need. But people wind up clicking because of psychology, which I'm sure they'll talk about later. But it's that gratification, and particularly when they get you at a low spot. Coming to your other point about people trying to not do it, I would probably point out I'm sure I'm in the minority, right? It's because I've lived in this world, and by that I mean the intersection of technology, business, and creativity for my entire career, that I behave the way I do. Because I know what I could do with my information, and I don't necessarily want to be treated like a commodity. But I would say that's probably 1% of the population that's out there, right? And I would again say that most people under the age of 30 are quite happy to give away their information for the convenience of Deliveroo and not having to walk around the corner to get their burger, but have somebody deliver it, or, find the book they want on Amazon, or use Google Maps. It's shocking how many people cannot actually read a map because they're just used to following the instructions on the phone to tell them where to go, and they don't look up. So they're totally missing life as well. I mean, again, I'll save it for the boundary. But I think there's a middle ground, right? And again, this is important for you guys as a community to think about. Think about what you are willing to accept and what you are willing to give away. And chances are that 80% of the people that you are trying to approach, whether they are billionaires or students, have that same frame of reference. It doesn't matter that you and I are older, right? It just doesn't. It's about, you've got a huge diversity of population that you're trying to reach. So you have to think about everybody. Don't think about the stereotypical, 30 white male who's single, because that demographic is dwindling, right? Think about the diversity of everybody who's out there, and then how you reach them, again, from a differentiation point of view, whether it be channels, whether it be content. It makes your jobs a little bit harder. But again, it's about the transparency and the trust.
One more question. I have taken us all the way to 11 o'clock. I'm wary of that. No? Okay.
So can I just say one more thing?
Please do.
To end. So I'm cognizant of the fact I've talked a lot. The one thing I think you all should take away from this, right? Trust is no longer a given. It has to be earned. And I made the point earlier about, like, every big corporate has had some sort of scandal. I read a thing this morning in the New York Times about a guy who was huge in the art world, ran the Whitney Museum, raised money for tons of people. Turns out some of those people were people like Jeffrey Epstein. Now, he's got nothing to do with Epstein, but just the fact that he's popped up in emails and the Department of Justice files has destroyed his reputation. And he's basically had to pull back. There's no allegation he did anything wrong, but he took money from somebody who now is tarnished. So again, I think transparency has to be key in this day and age, right? I remember when you would be told by the WWF, I'm not championing them, it's just personal experience, you're giving $10 to me, and this is how I'm spending the money. You should be that transparent with anybody you're asking for money. Everybody knows you need to be paid. Right? You're not all volunteers. It doesn't work like that. You have logistics costs, you have goods costs, but break it down and show people, right? Because that's how you're going to build that trust, is by having the transparency about what it is you're doing and how much of it is actually going. If it's 20, 30, maybe even 40% is being spent to run the charity and to provide the goods and services, I don't think people would flinch at that if they see the end result. What they are going to flinch at is when it's 70 or 80%, or your CEO is making $1.5 million, right?
Lee Fulmer, thank you very much indeed.